welcome back to the Web3 Native Podcast. Well, it's been a while since we've done an episode, and I'm so happy to be back in 2023 and see all of you. So today, we kick off this year with a fresh episode, actually, a bit of a throwback to our Year of the DAO series. We have with us Timour Kosters, partner at Seed Club Ventures. And just a little bit about Seed Club Ventures. It's a 25 million venture DAO focused on internet native organizations. They've made some incredible investments in areas related to social coordination, AI, the creator economy, things like Guild, Stability AI, Lens Protocol, Coordinate, Molecule. We're going to dive into all of that and the thesis areas. There are a few core contributors aside from Timour. There's Nima, Anthony, and it's a member-driven venture DAO with more than 60 funds and angels. And of course, among that, LongHash Ventures ourselves, we are proud to be a member alongside many friends at Seed Club Ventures. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So throwing back to the Year of the DAO, right? We spoke so much about DAOs. We brought in so many founders, from like Gnosis, Snapshot, CoinShift, and like many other angles. And we discussed like the state of it then. But the world has changed a lot, and with that, narratives change, terms change. I noticed that basically in the thesis of the unveiling of Seed Club Ventures, we spoke about internet native organizations, right? It seems that goodbye DAOs, here welcome INOs or INOs. What are INOs and why are we using this term?
Yeah, so thanks for having me. We are very much still DAO people. That's our space, that's our background. But the term DAO is experiencing some semantic drift. It's losing some meaning because everyone has a different definition of it. Now, we definitely do not want to meme another three-letter acronym into existence. So I am calling them internet native organizations. And I'll touch on kind of why we're thinking about it in that way. So the original idea of a DAO was that the rules that govern the product or community would be encoded in smart contracts, right? So it's this idea of automation at the center, humans at the edges. And what we're seeing these days is that there are many examples of amazing organizations that call themselves DAOs, but are not really autonomous, right? And they're at varying levels on the decentralization spectrum. But they're leaning into this new paradigm and what this technology allows for because, and they're not just interested in building a protocol or a self running DeFi product. There's a countless number of use cases already, and they're using terms for themselves like decentralized community or meta label, guild, or a DAO. And so we think of these as examples of internet native organizations with shared governance, ownership, and economic ties. So it's a bit more of an umbrella term. It's a bit more of a relaxed definition, less focused on automation. Some of these projects may be moving towards that, right? They're going through processes of progressive decentralization, progressive autonomization, but there are folks building social clubs as DAOs, new cities, communities that are aiming to buy basketball teams, you name it.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's exactly one of the properties that you have talked about before, which is because they're internet native and they can be, if I can quote some parts of the thesis piece, right? Set up in minutes, right? And use software to track contributions. And because things are digital and on chain, often they are open source, transparent, where we can automate a lot of rules and tasks. And what that means is that now we have a borderless organization. The speed of innovation is much faster. And also it's much more open given it's permissionless and forkable, right? So let's talk a bit about the properties and the benefits of these internet native organizations. You mentioned that many of them are going through that journey for decentralization, right? And I think it's always helpful to come back to that the original motivation, right? So why is it important to have shared ownership and shared governance? To me, that means decentralization, right? Like shared ownership and governance. And so what is the purpose of that? And I see a couple of kind of highlight areas and the kind of like different parts of the spectrum along like resilience and innovation. Would love to dive into that.
Yeah, speed of innovation, like you mentioned, the borderless nature of it. I think one thing that really helps drive this point home is some of the historical context, which we mentioned in the thesis essay that we launched with. It's on our website, but I'll quickly summarize. So, if you look at the history of types of organizations in the last 500 years, say, about 400 years ago in the age of exploration, that led to the creation of the joint stock company, which led to a huge boom in trade and commerce. And about 250 years later, during the Industrial Revolution, we saw the creation of the limited liability company, which also precipitated the growth seen in that period. That step was probably like 100x improvement in terms of efficiency and speed of execution for your ideas, right? You no longer, with the LLC, you no longer had to get a royal charter. You could invest your money and not risk personal bankruptcy if your venture lost everything. And so these inventions were kind of native to their times, right? They were native to the technology and the cultural needs and the economic needs of those periods. And so here we are, 200 years later, several decades into the internet age, and we still don't really have an internet native way of governing and sharing value. So you and I are communicating via hyperfast internet, instantaneous communication. We're literally on opposite sides of the earth right now. That's incredible. But if we wanted to collaborate on anything that could create meaningful enterprise value, it would be incredibly difficult, right? Like, where would we domicile the entity? How could we set up a bank account? If we started to grow our community, how would we come to decisions and have them trust us? People that we've potentially never met, and vice versa. So these organizations have these properties that you explained, and I think it represents another 100x step function improvement versus the prior systems. Um, And so, what's the point? Well, we can be borderless, like we said. We can automate rules and tasks, which removes the need to rely on a centralized intermediary, which I think is an incredibly powerful thing that folks who grew up outside of the global north kind of inherently understand. I was born and raised in the ashes of the Soviet Union, so I kind of inherently have this understanding of why we may not want to trust a centralized governing authority. They're open source, they're transparent, which cultivates trust. They can track contributions, which allows people to build their reputation. Ultimately, what is the point of all of this? I think these types of organizations combine this rich new design space for governance, ownership, and incentives with the ability to quickly experiment and learn from others who are doing the same, right? So we're in this crazy new space that is just perfectly primed for speed running learnings, right? Where it's perfectly primed for emerging behaviors because the cost of trying something has just gone down 100x in terms of time and money. You can do it with anyone in the world. You can learn from what everyone else is doing. And I think we're kind of on the precipice of just this Cambrian explosion of different use cases. Um, so I hope that kind of answered your question. I'm, as you can tell, very excited about this. Love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, for sure. Uh, yeah, so sticking on to that point around like the speed of innovation and how internet scale permissionless groups enable that, right? And also bringing in that historical perspective. If we now look at it from a historical perspective of like DAOs as well, right? I
Hmm,
think we have seen a shift from like what kinds of DAOs we have seen and the benefits that we expect or the purpose that these DAOs were set up in the first place, right? If I may just give a perspective here, what I
go
see
for
is
it.
that the DAOs of before often they wanted to scale for resilience, be it in the form of like regulatory arbitrage, which many of the first DAOs were set up to do, or to actually make sure there's sufficient, let's say, credible neutrality right? Like Ethereum talks a lot about a decentralization of like the validator nodes, so that we can maintain that liveness and maintain that neutrality if ever it's being potentially censored in certain countries, right? So I think the old generation of DAOs was about like having that scale, internet scale of like decentralizing, getting so many people involved in an internet native way, and it slows down the network to be sure, but it makes it a lot more anti-fragile and resilient, right? And that's super useful for protocols, super useful for things that you don't want a platform to control. And that's kind of like the doomsday scenario, like the Luna Punk thing, where like, oh yeah, we don't trust governments, right? We want like it to be everybody owned. But then the flip side that we have now discovered that like, hey, that's like the baseline of let's not die. Now that's how do we get to like the 100x improvement, is now the speed of innovation at internet scale, right? Where like DAOs, by virtue of decentralizing, actually are gathering a lot more ideas. A lot, like for example, with like public goods funding, like what are all the different ideas we can have? When to propagate a meme, like what are all the ideas that we can use to propagate a meme, right? So in this case, right, we're actually speeding up innovation. We're not slowing down for resilience. We're speeding up by incorporating any ideas in a borderless way. And to me, that is also changing the definition of DAOs. Into like what do you call INOs, right? Because the definition you mentioned just now was automation at the center, but we're also now seeing that like instead of being the tech and automation at the center and human at the edges, it's also shifting towards mission at the center and maybe tech around it to support that mission.
Mhm.
So just to finish up this point, all right, if we go back to the examples I mentioned, like having Bitcoin or Ethereum, where these like protocols at the center and we have social consensus to make sure that the chains are live, to make sure that the upgrades make sense, they're secure. We might need social slashing if there's some sort of censorship. And we saw like some of the early product-driven DAOs, right? Like Uniswap, Yearn, ENS, or even currently being developed things like SafeDAO, where like the open source immutable protocol is in the middle, and like we're governing how do we like share resources and ownership in order to continue to grow the adoption of protocol. The newer DAOs, the balance, center of balance has shifted around the mission being in the middle, and then how do we use the tool? So, for example, the propagating a meme like nouns DAO, right, where like it's about like the nouns, and then the auction serves that. The projects that we're funding, the governance serves that, or with like public goods funding as the meme, right, with Gitcoin, and like the actual quadratic funding mechanism serves that, right, and then on the far end of the spectrum, things like Ukraine DAO or Friends of Benefits FWB, where the mission is as everything, and you could argue that the tech is maybe even optional to push it to an extreme, where like Ukraine DAO
Mhm.
could have been funded with fiat if that was possible or practical. And FWB could have been on like a Telegram Discord kind of thing. And you can, and even if whatever the platform they are currently on is completely broken, if as long as we have representation and a place to come together, these like mission driven DAOs are like, because mission is in the middle and people are in the middle, they can come together and use any tech and use any platform that they like. Love to hear your view around this evolution.
Yeah, this is an excellent, excellent point. I I completely agree. When we think about the purpose of decentralization, I love the framing of okay, we started with caring about resilience of these more kind of protocol level projects, but then through interacting with these products, we realized that hey, we actually feel like we're part owners of this thing now, right? Or through singular moments in time, like the Uniswap airdrop, people realized, oh wow, I've been a user of this thing, I've helped it grow, and now I'm being rewarded for that. I have ownership to some degree, and hey, look, I can actually vote in governance proposals, so I have governance as well. So and to put a point on that, an important aspect is also that if the Uniswap protocol network grows, as a part owner, I can also see upside in that. And that idea, those ideas have been taken and morphed and played around with in a whole spectrum of potential use cases. And this touches on something that I've been thinking about, which is that Web3 is really as much a cultural innovation as a technological one. And there are new affordances that are given to us by the technology and by these primitives. But it also has kind of awoken old ideas about community and ownership and what these things actually mean and what rights we have to participate in the in the things that we build. There's a really interesting concept from Nathan Schneider called innovation amnesia. I don't know if he coined it, but that's where I learned it from, which is this idea that a lot of the things that we talk about in Web3 have been around for a long time, right? Co-ownership has a lineage tracing back hundreds of years to cooperatives and there's examples of that for some of the other ideas that we talk about a lot. But somehow this new technology allows us to see an easier path to a future where we can actually implement some of those ideas. And so we can learn from those historical lineages, but it's also okay. It's actually a productive process to almost forget some of it because it comes with a lot of baggage, right? Like the idea of co-ownership 70 years ago in the US would probably get you landed in jail or at least branded a commie. Whereas now it's cool. Like there's tech bros talking about it, there's folks in SF talking about it, there's, artists, DJs, whatever talking about it. And that's great. Let's lean into more of that.
Mm.
Um, I think what this all comes down to is that DAOs allow us to want different things. They allow us to have different goals than we would have from normal corporations. You gave some excellent examples with FWB. I think another good one is Constitution DAO, right? If we wanted to, actually no, I'm gonna say this more concretely. I don't think it would have been possible to go and try and buy a very expensive copy of the Constitution, like Constitution DAO did. Or at the very least, it was not in my realm of objectives that I could
Mm.
possibly care about or want. And suddenly, this technology, which did make it much easier, and you probably couldn't pool that much capital over a weekend if you tried, even from like US persons. But suddenly this technology just like boom, it opened up this idea space and we're all now thinking like well, okay, I guess I can now buy Constitution or buy a golf course like Links DAO is doing or buy a basketball team like Kraus House is doing. I can participate in the creation of the next Hollywood movie like Storyco is doing. I can build a network city like Cabin is doing. It's you know when you really dig into these examples, to your point, there are varying levels of automation and decentralization. These are all, again, kind of things that we aspire to, but it has just blown open just what the space of what is possible. And I think that's really cool.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think that nobody expected the basketballs and the golf courses and like yeah, just cabins in the woods and nature and
Yeah.
woodwork. Yeah, and
But I
I think
think the
that's the
key,
yeah.
the other thing here is that like, I think the DAOs of the future are going to look very different to how they look now, right? And I'd
Mm.
be really curious for your thoughts on this as well. But I think that we've kind of been aiming at the lowest hanging fruit so far. And back to the point around emergence, eh, you know, we've tried direct democracy and we, figured out where that works and where it doesn't. We've tried a bunch of other kind of governance things. Um, we've tried to make marketing agencies but decentralized or lending protocols but decentralized. And these are amazing 10x improvements. But I genuinely think that there are going to be entirely net new ways that are completely impossible right now to forecast. I think Nouns is a great example, right? Where we have this whole ecosystem whose sole motivation is the propagation of a meme. That is a very powerful new idea, right? Memes are just ideas, and ideas are the core of everything. So, what is that going to look like in 5 years? Don't ask me. I don't know, but I'm excited for it. I'm investing towards that future.
Absolutely. Yeah. Was there a question there as well that you're looking for a view on?
No, well, curious for your thoughts on any or all of that, but no, more of just an excited monologue, I would say.
Yes, I think this whole episode is gonna be a collection of that. Yeah, exactly. Part of the excitement is that we don't know what to expect, but what we do know is that there's a north star, like you said, of shared ownership, of shared governance, and certainly I think we've identified a lot of inefficiencies or issues that we need to continue to iterate, right? So, for example, with how do you make governance efficient? How do you surface the right level of curation so that the right people and proposals get rewarded? And how do you surface the right votes such that the people who have been contributing the most, or people who are most knowledgeable about a particular topics and areas, are able to reflect that in the weightage of their vote, or perhaps reflected in their loyalty and interests in the DAO, right? And I think in the past it's just been very simple, like coin voting and mechanisms of distributing incentives. And now we start to see like there's a lot more room for imagination with a decentralized society. We're seeing SPTs come up, verifiable credentials come up, proof of humanity come up. And we are seeing all types of like a spectrum of roles. I know we invest in hats, for example, or different ways to engage in the DAO with like joke, for example, with like contests and mini proposals. So I think like the rate of innovation, like and the targeted pain points that we're addressing are becoming clearer, and I'm excited to see what will come up.
Absolutely. Yeah, very well said.
So we've spent like around 20 minutes talking about very conceptual things. We had plenty of examples, uh, but it's still kind of like we're plucking from like all sorts of places. Now let's make it very real and talk
Yeah.
about one case example. And what better example than ourselves at C Club Ventures,
Mhm.
which is itself a venture DAO. Um, right, and as I understand, there's a legal setup, but there's also in spirit is of course a complete like member driven organization, and
Mhm.
it's related of course to C Club, which has a DAO itself and an accelerator. Now, why did we pick the venture DAO route, right? Like, given our exposure and experience with various types of internet native organizations, this could have been, for example, a mission-driven non-profit organization that says, "Hey, look, we want to support like internet native organizations. Let's like fund all the public goods here." Or it could have been a particular product that you're trying to drive, right? That would have promoted the adoption of internet native organizations. So why this particular path of a venture DAO?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, why invest in the first place, right? What role does venture capital actually have in the building of an ecosystem? I would say it plays a relatively important role, depending who you ask, in de-risking some of the early explorations, especially in a very risky space, right? There are there's insane risk that entrepreneurs face in this new space and industry, and there are folks who are incredibly excited about what's happening here, but don't have the capability to just strike out on their own and say, okay, I'm just gonna try and build this thing. So why are we not a nonprofit? Well, we are huge supporters of folks who are and who run grants programs, and we think that's an incredible path forward, and we need much more of that. But we're also excited to be able to funnel the profit incentive. We're a DAO that has a membership of 63 members. About a dozen of those are other big crypto funds like Multicoin Capital, Dragonfly, Delphi Digital. We have some family offices, fund of funds, traditional VCs. We have about we have some corporates like Gnosis, and about half the membership are other builders and founders, etc. We want to funnel all of that energy into supporting our portfolio, right? So, unlike a traditional VC fund, this touches on why we're a venture DAO rather than a venture fund. Unlike a traditional VC fund, which has LPs who give you capital and say, okay, call me in 10 years, good luck. Our members, like yourselves, are very involved in the processes. They help the core team with all of the functions. If we think about what a venture investment process entails, it's essentially we form theses, we source deals, we due diligence those deals and invest in the ones that we like, and then we support our portfolio projects. And there are aspects of our processes that lend themselves very well to being more decentralized and some that don't, right? To be just fully candid. So the things where it's super helpful to have this ecosystem are the formation of theses, sourcing deals, because we have experts like you guys at LongHash who see things and think, okay, this actually fits with the C Club Ventures thesis. Let's get in front of them. And we really like having this network for supporting our portfolio projects, because each project that we back gets this entire ecosystem behind it, right? Where we found that maybe there is still room for innovation in terms of how to best utilize this ecosystem is in the process of due diligence, where we found that actually it's great to have some consistency in the way that we look at projects and companies. And to that end, and kind of for that reason, we have three partners, myself and Anthony and Nima, who are kind of keeping the train on the tracks. We're driving the ship forward. We do the primary bulk of the diligence, and we make sure that members know how they can best kind of be involved. So I think, and one thing I'll touch on as well is that we have a legal structure that allows us to spin up sub DAOs, which are essentially kind of focused groups that specialize in a specific vertical or eventually perhaps a specific function, like when should we sell deals. And so that allows us to move quickly and kind of, iterate fast in a very dynamic industry. So this gives us, I think, the best of all worlds, right? We have a diversity of thought. We can source deals from a huge network. We're very hands on with helping the portfolio. We avoid a lot of the free rider problems and tragedy of the commons problems that a lot of the kind of first iteration of venture DAOs faced, where everyone pulls money together, but it takes a lot of work to like properly diligence something, to follow through with the investment. And sometimes it's easier to kind of just take a step back and relax. There are lots of interesting experiments running in this space. Hydra Ventures, which I think we'll announce this week, is a venture DAO fund of funds, which I think is really cool. We're participating there. Chain Forest is another venture DAO that has done really cool stuff. So I think it's a really cool kind of area to be playing in. Would love to hear your thoughts. Actually, you guys have a very interesting vantage point. You have your accelerator, you have your fund. Are there other venture DAOs that you've invested in? If not, why not?
Yeah, absolutely. We have very selectively invested in a few venture DAOs, or I guess funds, more from like a personal side. And I think the main reason we do that is for, I guess, strategic and complementary reasons, right? I think, as you said, similar to how DAOs are spinning up with very specific and focused missions, a lot of funds are getting spun up today, right? It used to be that the whole of Web3 space is so small that it's like, yeah, I'm a crypto fund, and that's it. You just look at crypto. But now Web3 and crypto is so huge. There's so many verticals, be it from from the infra layer to like gaming and social, and of course like within internet native organizations, there's a very specific thesis, right? So we love that, and that's why we're participating, and we did a couple others as well. For example, related to zero knowledge, like Zero DAO, where you have a bunch of people like
Great.
razor focus on the technology and the huge potential there, or with Cooper's music, Coop
Nice.
Records. where
Nice.
like he's just like 24/7 and obsessed with music
Yeah.
and yeah, we love him. He's been on the pod a couple times as well. So we see that these like very focused funds just once you thread the needle on that focus, then you kind of like open up in that area and like cover that area quite comprehensively. In terms of the setup and synergy, our answer here is that it's about the synergy of the accelerator. So
Hmm.
our setup is we have the accelerator that supports early stage builders and partners up with ecosystems or protocols so that we can bootstrap those ecosystems, right? So we not only work with these founders on accelerator program, we support the grants program as well as part of evaluation. We bring in some of the even earlier stage builders as part of like a fellowship to join
Hmm.
our workshops and mentorship sessions, and so that whole effort goes into it's almost like creating a public good that really accelerates the growth of the ecosystem. Whereas our fund, well, which is not yet a venture now, uh, invests in the underlying infrastructure, and then the accelerator will bootstrap its growth. And to me, I actually see a similar story with C Club Ventures as well, right? Because a lot of the investments
Totally.
are the DAO infra, and then the C Club Accelerator has a lot of the organizations, right? The people and the actual use cases, and those can then use a lot of the portfolio. So we're kind of curating a suite of infra and increasingly modular tools, like different aspects that they can use, such that like the moment somebody comes through the accelerator, hey, here are all the things you can use and all the learnings that they have gone through, right, to come to this suite of products.
That's very well put. And that's exactly the thesis and the genesis story of Seed Club Ventures and why it was born out of Seed Club. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so just touching a little bit on uh, venture investment again,
Hmm.
we see quite a funny trend is that the meme is that everybody in Web3 or crypto eventually becomes an investor, right? Where like you might
Totally.
raise funds to build a product, and then you start angel investing. Like all the founders who have kind of made it, so to speak, are venture investing. A lot of the even the product driven DAOs who have a sizable treasury are investing in early stage products. We've seen, for example, Gnosis DAO spin up like so many projects, right? From like
Hmm.
Save, CowSwap, and so on. So
Yeah.
um,
Uniswap has a venture fund. Shout out Teo. So, and it makes a ton of sense, you know?
exactly. So is this the future, right? For I guess DAOs in general, where hey, it's about like if you have funds, like pay it forward by investing, and you kind of align your value with the ecosystem by having ownership in the things that you're investing in, right? So I don't know what it kind of kicks the can down the road because it's the problem with a lot of the DAO infra is that it's very hard to monetize, but there are a lot of people using it, and you have a great community, a great network, and you suddenly find that hey, actually, I have an opportunity to invest in all of these social groups, DAOs, other infra projects,
Hmm.
and suddenly they find themselves like investing. Or if you find that like, hey, there's a good alignment, you can do token swaps, right? And so suddenly there's a shared ownership. So in the end, the business model or value alignment comes through owning mutual ownership or like ownership through investment rather than like, hey, I'm charging you money to use my product.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, I think to answer your question, I think it is the future. It's also the past, right? The technology industry in general has had multiple waves of this, of successful companies setting up corporate VCs or founders who become angels or GPs at their own funds. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I think we now just have more ability to do interesting things. To your point, Uniswap, or I don't know, pick an example of a protocol, can probably, invest in companies, and if they also have a liquid token, do token swaps. I don't know if that's interesting to them, but it's possible. Um, it's also, I think, just becoming more of a thing because so many of the early successes in the space. And also lots of the folks building now are building kind of protocol level work. And then they usually also build the first one or two apps on top of that. But they want to encourage this ecosystem, right? So that's where the grants programs come in. That's why you guys run incredible accelerators on behalf of some of these projects. And it makes a ton of sense that they would also be doing venture investments. So yeah, I think it makes a ton of sense. We're all kind of building these flywheels, right? Seed Club is building this DAO flywheel. We're getting a bunch of DAO builders through the accelerator, and then we're making sure that there are tools they can use on the other side and interesting applications in other verticals. But yeah, we can touch on that later.
Yeah, let's go there now. Keeping it real, like all the tools that people can use. So, what are the tools that C Club Ventures is using ourselves specifically?
Wow, put me on the spot. Yes, this is a really, really good question. I will tell you the full honest answer. So we are, well, let me just tell you our stack. Okay, safe multi-sig, obviously, communications channel. We use Telegram and email. I don't know if you can count that as part of the stack. We have had significant legal framework work, and let's think. We use Paragraph for our newsletters, which is like a Web3 Substack, and we have a social presence, right? Twitter and Lens. So we're fairly light in terms of the actual like tooling aspects. And that makes sense because we are a very simple community. We have a very singular goal of deciding who to invest in and then supporting them, right? We have a small community of 60 people. We can align fairly easily. We can do soft governance on our investment votes. What I will say, I think inherent in your question is a question of like, okay, how is this experience of running this fund or this venture DAO? What insight has that given us in terms of the type of tooling that we like to see, right? So going through the legal headache gave us incredible insight into the into just how difficult that process can be. That was a critical part of our investment into CaliDAO, which is essentially an entire suite of products that makes that process much easier for DAOs. Going through the decision-making frameworks and processes helps us understand why DAOs need better group decision-making tools. This is a personal area of interest for me. I'll be honest that I think we in general as a space, and also we internally have a long, long way to go. You mentioned Joke DAO, and I think they're going to be incredible kind of unlocks in that area. And then I think as we scale, we'll probably end up, either raising venture DAO number 2 or just increasing the scale of what we currently have and creating this almost like meta organization with a bunch of sub DAOs, and each of them has increasing AUM that's dedicated to them. And as in either direction, we'll need to integrate things like reputation. So we'll use things like Karma or Govern. We'll use Guild, which is another one of our investments for community access. You mentioned Hats. Hats protocol that can definitely come into use. It's like role management protocol. Everything on chain makes a ton of sense for this use case. Perhaps delegation could fit into that as well. So this, I'll finish by saying this all kind of showcases why we are excited about the modular future of DAOs and how individual tools can kind of piece together and be customizable together rather than kind of all-in-one out-of-the-box solutions for, okay, boom, here's your DAO setup, have fun. What we've already seen is just the insane diversity and plethora of potential use cases doesn't really lend itself well to like DAO in a box. So yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I think so. To be fair, sorry, I'm putting you on the spot. I think to be fair, this is the case for a lot of DAOs, be it venture DAOs or otherwise, and even kind of crypto native organizations, right? And crypto native people, where we're like, hey, you believe in crypto, so what apps are you using on an everyday basis, right? And people kind of
Right, right,
struggle.
right, right,
You're gonna struggle
right.
to say, and like, okay, sure, like I've paid my friend for a meal, by sending stable coins somewhere, but like everyday apps, not yet, not quite yet. And similar with like our own organizations and DAOs, like which kind of tools, and are all the memberships like tokenized and token gated, and then like have all these reputations? Not quite yet. And it speaks to both the pain point and aspiration that we want to get there, but also like kind of state of where we are today, and the opportunities that are still out there, right? A little bit from our
100%.
personal experience, touching on your point around modular products, is so for our accelerator, it's a bit of a sneak peek that we're actually trying to turn ourselves more decentralized and into a DAO as well, right? Because if you think of an
Cool.
accelerator, what it is really a collective of our venture builders, the mentors, investors that come together, and all the founders themselves. So it is really the group of people coming together, and the connections, right? So how do we represent that in a social and contribution network? We started to issue soulbound tokens using Syndicate, right? And that's like, okay, you start there, right? Start to build a social graph on chain. And whoever is coming to our demo day and showing interest, hey, let's give a POAP. And that's also a simple way to start to build that
Hmm.
social graph. And once we have like more data points, we can start to now build roles, build ownership, build governance into it. And so we're taking this very bottom up approach as well.
I love that. I actually remember speaking to your team about that because I saw the news that you were rolling that out, and I thought it was interesting. It maps like one to one to some of the ideas that I had in terms of incentivization systems internally for ourselves as well. The way I've been thinking about it is so I think your system has two different soulbound tokens, right? One for any kind of general help, and then one if someone goes really deep with a portfolio company. That's incredible,
Yeah.
right?
So it's referrals, knowledge, and time. Yes.
Okay, cool. So I think what's cool about that is that if you imagine that you were around in the early days of YC and you were just adding a ton of value to those companies and you were getting tokens for that, tokens that you are with you for life. No one can really call into question their authenticity or anything. That now would just be the most incredible resume, right? That you could show to anyone that you wanted to collaborate with and say, hey, this is what I've done over that time. So I would love to have something like that for LongHash Ventures Accelerator, right?
Yeah.
I think
Well, it's
there's
called LongHash Web. Yeah.
sorry. So for LongHash Web, so
Oh no,
I
the,
think
the,
that
the mechanism is
people,
called LongHash Web, but yeah, the accelerator is LongHashX. A couple of brands there.
yeah. So I would love to have that for LongHashX, and I think that people, when they think about incentive systems, they go instantly towards, okay, what kind of financial incentive can we imbue this token system with, right? And I think that obviously financial incentives are incredibly powerful, but sometimes they can actually lead to adverse effects. There are interesting examples there, but we shouldn't forget about the power of social incentives and kind of just making it easier to get people over the hurdle of wanting to do something they already wanted to do, like provide value or help. So I'm going to be really excited to see how that all pans out for you all. And I think we'll probably be rolling something similar out in terms of soulbound tokens on our end as well soon.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll definitely love to exchange learnings as we both embark on that journey.
Yeah,
All
great.
right. We are like 45 minutes in, and we covered a lot of conceptual stuff. We made it real by talking about like what are we using and what are we actually building. Uh, and now let's go to then the future looking thesis predictions and the various
Hmm.
verticals. We touched on quite a few of them already. And so now this is the meat of like the deep dive. First, to talk about investment areas, right? Before we go into the verticals, let's just quickly touch on which parts of the stack are we investing in, right? We talked about like we're investing in kind of the infra, and then the DAOs themselves will come through the accelerator. But from the infra perspective, there are various levels you can invest, right? Be it from a protocol level, where it's, hey, here's like infrastructure that everybody can build on, something like Lens, for example, and they don't want to have their own front end, so to speak, right? And other people build the front ends. Or like it's from an application standpoint, right? So like a Lenster equivalent for a Lens, is that where the value is going to accrue? Or increasingly, is it somewhere in the middle, where like, hey, look, here's an SDK for any social circle, and you have the full flexibility to use these different protocols. I integrate more modules, be it like with identity and so on, right? And sometimes we see even the protocols build their own SDKs, or from an application level, you start to go towards an SDK so that it becomes more flexible to other builders, and kind of it all interconnects, right? Do you have a particular view on where you're more bullish on, or a particular ratio of like where you might invest?
Yeah, we are fairly stack agnostic, I would say. We've made investments throughout the stack. It's also, you might think you're investing in, to your point, like a middleware startup, and suddenly they're building protocol level work that other people are building on top of. So I I think about it less in that sense. And the ratio we do have, if I look at our portfolio, is something like 50% of our investments are DAO infra tooling and DAOs themselves. So usually like products that decentralized orgs will use, or some decentralized organizations themselves, which could end up spawning products that other orgs will use, or protocols or whatever. So it's all kind of blurry there. And then the other 50%, and this is where I'm super excited, is we want to see applications of these ideas and tools in other verticals. So we're excited to get crypto Web3 outside of its bubble and start to impact other areas, as it has been already. Um, but yeah, so that's kind of how I would paint that picture.
Okay, so balanced view, 50-50, and I love that idea around going out of crypto. Let's go there now, right? So I saw some of the areas, and I've taken the liberty to summarize them into a neat little framework of
Amazing,
three
please.
groups of verticals. So we're looking at like machines, humans, and memes, right? And so from the machine
Nice,
side,
nice.
lots of what about AI and like physical infrastructure. From human standpoint, we're talking about creators and creativity, and everything that under that. And then on the meme side, like mission driven, vibes driven, culture driven. So that's more like in its own level of existence. And let's go through each of them, and the investments that we have made in those verticals, as well as our predictions of like where the interesting projects may lie. So starting with machines, obviously, AI is changing the world. These foundational models are disrupting everything, apparently. And at C Ventures, of course, one of probably the highlight of the portfolio is Stability AI, right? Which is behind the popular image generation model, Stable Diffusion. And as I understand, we are the first investors at like the 7 million round, and now it's definitely unicorn and beyond. So let's would love to understand our view of in AI, and with learnings from Stability AI, right? So what are we looking for? Where is the value going to be? What are the pain points that Web3 can solve?
Yeah, no, that's super well summarized. So AI, lots happening, especially in the last year or two. We've seen some of the consumer use cases that have come to the forefront. They are, truly magical, and it's quite incredible to see what's happening there. We approach the space with a crypto lens, of course. There are folks on our team that have backgrounds in AI research, so we've been making investments since the start. The first kind of big AI investment we made was Stability AI. And when we look at these companies, we're really thinking about, okay, what does crypto and Web3 actually enable here? So if we just make a quick list, it's essentially community ownership and governance, right? New models for incentivization and coordination at scale, and data tracking and provenance. And then, well, we believe in general that folks that use Web3 principles from the beginning of their startups, no matter what they're building, will build more robust networks, because products that have user ownership at their core will just be more successful. So that's kind of the overview there. And then how does this apply to AI? So there are some really obvious use cases. I think one that's generally understood now is that we're about to see this insane deluge of AI created content, right? It's just going to take over the internet, and we need to be very careful about tracking who made what. So, for example, we put out this podcast. It would be quite trivial now to make 1,000 copies of it, change the things we're saying slightly, make it seem like we said things we didn't. We're going to, I think, very soon have a cryptographic way to sign everything that we create and say, hey, this actually was us and this is the real version, right? And this is going to be commoditized. I think this is going to be like protocol level. This is just going to happen. And there's going to be metadata readers that like pick it up and only surface the true versions. This also relates to data sovereignty, right? Foundation models are trained on our data. There are companies like Spawning, which is another investment that we've made, who are creating rails that will allow us to opt out. So they actually, for the latest release of Stable Diffusion 3, you can now opt out using Spawning's infrastructure. If you're an artist, you can say, I don't want my art to be used in the training of this model. So that's really fucking cool, right? They're working with Stability on that. Sorry for swearing. And then there are novel incentivization models, and these can be used for things like rewarding people for doing open source research work, so there's just like a huge design space there in terms of incentivization and like token-based models. Stability are actually experimenting with grants systems for researchers, like Gitcoin grants, which I think is really cool. You can imagine token-based ecosystems for RLHF, which is reinforcement learning from human feedback. It's essentially humans sitting at a computer and training the AI to be better by telling it what they prefer in terms of its outputs. And so you can incentivize people to do that. You can track their contributions. You could even imagine, like you mentioned, decentralized physical infrastructure networks. You could imagine a version of that for AI where you have decentralized compute ecosystems. I think there's a project called BitTensor that's doing interesting stuff there. So to answer your question, after all of that, I think the area where I'm most excited, so I think decentralized compute is interesting. I think it's a little bit optimistic for where we are right now. We are always looking at interesting incentivization models and how Web3 Rails can be used there. We're also looking at where emergent DAO structures are relevant. And this is actually where I'm most excited, because specifically with AI, communities and decentralized communities have been core to pushing the space forward, right? There's communities like Lion, Eleuther AI, they're doing a lot of work in the open. Their data sets are being used by everyone from OpenAI to Stability to everyone in between. And these things are going to continue to spring up, these types of communities. There's one called Harmony, which is like music, open source AI people. And Web3 is like superpowers for communities, right? It can turn users into owners. Governance can be democratized. Participants can have a say in the direction of what's happening. So those are areas where we think there could be a ton of potential. But I'll finish by saying, this is obviously a very powerful technology. It will continue to become more and more important. there is a lot of work that has been done in the open thus far, but it's definitely trending more centralized. It's trending towards becoming much more closed. Um, Training large foundation models requires a ton of resources, ton of access to compute and data. And I think the question is, okay, do we want this whole ecosystem to be controlled by 2 or 3 companies? Or do we want to have this kind of rich, decentralized ecosystem of development and folks innovating all the way up and down the stack, startups at every layer of the stack? Um, I don't think crypto solves that, but it can have a role to play, and that's something that we're excited about.
Yeah, for sure. I love the fresh take here. To me, after looking at quite a few kind of AI theses, is that the community first or human first and internet native organization first point of view keeps it customer centric or user centric, right? So from like the data set standpoint of like how do we form communities around particular data sets or like to curate particular data sets. And then on the training front, not so optimistic right now on the decentralized compute, but with a human assisted, I guess, feedback or tagging from the training perspective. Again, that doesn't cut out humans, right? Like now we're like, hey, actually, they need humans, they need input and like refinements. And then
For
around
now, yeah, for now it's useful. We'll see how long that
we'll see
lasts.
how yeah, and then of course from the application standpoint as well, right? Around which communities can use it and how do we create open models that can benefit or like again like speed up the scale and speed of innovation. So at every step of the way, right, having a DAO first or human or community first mindset hopefully helps us build more open and like more human friendly products.
Yeah, 100%. I think one way to drive this point home is to think about it from the point of view of a aspiring researcher, right? Or someone that already has a deep understanding of some interesting new aspect of ML research. You kind of have 2 options right now. You can go into academia where you probably won't have access to the level of compute that you might want, or you can go and work at a big 4 tech company or OpenAI, and then you'll sign 60 pages of NDAs, and anything cool you work on will be like, will never see the light of day, right?
Hmm.
And now what's exciting is that um, there is kind of a third path that's being essentially trailblazed by Stability AI and other organizations. There's a lot of really cool work being done in the open, aside from just Stability, where you can go and do your work. It can be published open source. Stability actually has legal clauses that anyone that works for it will always be able to publish their work, even if it's done within the realm, within the confines of Stability.
Hmm.
It can always be published open source. And they have revenue share agreements with the authors of papers that if that work goes on to drive revenue, those authors will see some percentage of it, including authors that don't work at Stability. So
Hmm.
they've essentially, it's this like open source, go big or go home. It's like, here we are, we're going to drive deals for compute. We're going to drive deals with uh, media companies or organizations that want our services to get revenue. And then we're going to make sure that the people doing the work get paid. So
Hmm.
that's really cool, right?
Hmm.
And super exciting to see.
I love that. Yeah. This radical openness and ideas of shared ownership is truly embodying the spirit of Web3 and crypto. Moving on to the second part, right? So moving away from machines now to humans, which is a totally different ball game. We see the rise of the freelance economy, the creator economy, and a lot of that is intersecting now with crypto, right? In the form of NFTs and then in the form of like mutual collaboration and therefore shared ownership. And then, as I understand, we've made a few investments in this area as well. So I would love to understand the thesis here.
Yeah, yeah. I love this framing. These are inherently kind of human ideas. So I think of this space as like art, music, creativity. And I think this whole space is about to just be blown wide open by Web3. And one question we like to ask is, okay, why now? And the reason is that the creators in these fields who underpin the whole thing are struggling, right? Something has to change. Yancey Strickler, the founder and CEO of Meta Label, which is an investment of ours, and the founder of Kickstarter, uh, just published an essay called "The Old Shit Doesn't Work Anymore," and I think it just perfectly encapsulates how it just isn't working unless you're in the top 0.001% of musicians or artists or filmmakers. It is not a sustainable model in terms of the way that things are currently working. So obviously NFTs are going to play a huge role there. Decentralized financial rails will play a huge role there, and I think DAOs will too. And the way that DAOs will help, I think, lies at the intersection of kind of collaboration and community. So we can illustrate with some examples. MetaLabel, the Yancey's company, is essentially an operating system for creatives, for groups of creatives to release work together. So it's a form that encourages people to collaborate, support each other in creative projects, and then create a digital on-chain output that so far has been incredibly successful. Um, this touches on again of like cultural innovation as well as technological innovation. It's doing things that you probably could do without the tech, except for there's obviously a ton of interesting on-chain stuff. But it's this new world where people are like, wait, we can collaborate on something and we can release it, and people actually want to buy it. They want to collect. They want to be owners, right? Another project that's related is Songcamp, which is kind of a decentralized music creation laboratory. It's groups of musicians and creatives who are working together on drops. It's essentially like uh, it's like a band, right? Meta label's kind of like a label infrastructure thing. Songcamp's like a band. They're actually making this stuff. And the community can now participate in co-creating works and getting upside from the works that they create. So they have a band called Chaos, which is a headless band, something like 66 creatives banded together, made a bunch of songs. There were visual artists in that group who made incredible artwork. They all sold them, all shared the upside. Yeah, so just incredible example. And also related to this kind of co-creation idea is a company called Storyco. I highly recommend checking out story.co. They have a beautiful first creation up on the website. It's really, really cool. It's this idea of collaborative, decentralized storytelling. So co-creating the next generation of stories that might become Hollywood movies or short films or whatever. Um, I think this is really cool. This is a really cool idea where the fans can also start to become at least partially the creators. They can, you suddenly have 1,000 people who might have interesting ideas, and using AI, the hurdle to storyboarding those ideas or presenting them is super low now, right? So
Hmm.
a ton of ideas pop up. People can vote on what they think are the best ones. Someone should have final authority, right? Creative works usually work well with either in smaller groups or with a writer's room that has some, final say over what gets put out. But then
Hmm.
everyone participated in the creation. So suddenly you have this big group of people that are incentivized to see this thing succeed. They are like,
Hmm.
uh, creators, customers, marketing department, like all rolled into one, right?
Hmm.
So I think that's super interesting. I'll give one more example. So Refraction DAO is a community that produces cultural events and content. So they put on festivals, events, but they also do NFT drops. Um, they're decentralized. They're throwing events all over the world. And what I love about Refraction is that it I've been talking about this a lot. It perfectly shows how it kind of it's the perfect example of this model where you have a core initial team who sets up the brand, the concept, the values, the mission, and then they can share the blueprint that they came up with and quickly fork it all over the world, right? So you can scale
Hmm.
to dozens of cities pretty much, in a matter of days or weeks versus years. So
Hmm.
I think they've been around for just a year and they've thrown a ton of events.
Hmm.
They have thousands of members of the DAO and tens of thousands of attendees. So I think this showcases how DAOs are kind of this like bootstrapping scaling technology where once you hit upon a good idea, you
Hmm.
can very quickly scale it. And there needs to be some control on that. Obviously, you don't want to forego quantity. You don't want quantity over quality. But once you have product market fit, you can scale very quickly. So these are all pieces of a beautiful Lego puzzle piece that
Hmm.
is 100% emergent, and who knows where this will lead. But those are some of the things I'm excited about.
Oh yeah, and I hear a very coherent theme coming across here around the creation and co-creation, collaboration there, and then discovering and owning that through some form of NFTs, or like you said, collecting, and then the fans themselves can now create stuff. One key question that I've been thinking about in this area is, I know the new models are very hard to predict and they're emergent, but what exactly are we collecting? I feel that like it is not really known, right? Are we collecting? Is it something like a master copy? Should you have royalties? Do you need a separate revenue model? Do you need like utility around these things that you're collecting, or are they just collectibles for their own sake, and just to show that social relationship? Should we expect the creators to give some social perks to these guys? Should we expect them to
Mhm.
self-organize? I guess all of the above, right? In a way, it reminds me of the kind of DeFi protocols when it first came out. Like, this is a product, but it's also kind of a public good because it's a immutable protocol, that smart contract that just lives on the chain. Anybody can use it. So is it a business? Is it a public good? Is it, and then what do these tokens do? uh, and like today we still don't have a clear answer, and I think with these NFTs that we're collecting, it's to me even kind of further out, and we're still in the early days. Do you have a prediction on where it will go?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I would say, to your point of what are we actually collecting, and you gave a bunch of really good examples. I would say it's all of the above. Like the whole point is that we now have a design space where creators can play around with what works for them and what works for their community. In some cases, you might be able to actually own the master copies of a song. In other cases, what would it mean to own a 1 in 1000 NFT edition that is provably linked to a movie that wins the Oscars? I don't know. We're going to find out, right? Fairly soon, I imagine. So, um, this is a very kind of new and unopinionated technology that people can. It's malleable. You can use it to as you see fit. What I will say from my own experience is that it has awakened a collecting a collector inside me that I don't think I ever
Mm,
actually existed. I never collected baseball cards or things like this. But when you can collect an NFT, and that in some cases it gives you access to a one-on-one relationship with an artist or a musician, that to me is incredibly interesting, right? And I think that's interesting to some creatives that want to open up the door for something like that. Others might not want that at all, but they might create something that just has inherent collectible value, right? And
mm.
people want it like they want an original baseball card. So we're going to see there's already a ton of incredible experiments being run, but yeah, it's exciting to see what happens.
Absolutely. I remember collecting a Chaos Hits pack from Songcamp, and then opening it, listening to music, and it just feels different when you own the NFT of a
Exactly.
song,
Like
and you
if you
listen.
just heard that on Spotify, you'd be like, "Okay, this is cool," but the whole unpacking experience, I've been playing music, I've been DJing for 10 plus years at this point. I buy vinyl, I DJ with vinyl. There's no reason to do this. I honestly don't even, I'm not one of those people that thinks it sounds better. Sorry, I might get canceled by the vinyl community, but there's something about the experience that makes me do this silly, expensive, difficult thing. And and there are people who are much more into this stuff than I am, right? So I think it's just going to be this whole new world of what does it actually mean to be a fan, or what does it mean to interact with a creator? Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's a feeling, it's a vibe that you can't quite explain. And with that, let's go to the third and final kind of cluster and area of our thesis, which is memes, ideas, the fluffy stuff that somehow has value, right? And here I know there are a few ideas that we are investing in. So of course, would love to touch on cities and how curating like a network
Mhm.
city based on the shared culture and vibe, or a more mission driven hard thing like even like the side, right, with science and like funding longevity and the idea of longevity and how these tools can empower humanity, and be it through human experimentation, or like physical things like living somewhere to propagate these ideas to help these memes and ideas
Mhm.
grow.
Yeah. Yeah, great examples. I never would have thought to kind of combine the DeSci experiments, the DeSci investments we've made, and the cities and cabin under this umbrella of memes, but I really like it. I'm a meme maxi. I think they're probably the most important things in the world. And yeah, so that makes sense to me. Just to quickly touch on DeSci. So science, the research kind of the way that research works is that usually it's done in kind of closed silos with very rigid incentive structures, whether that's in academia and you kind of want to get your research, which you probably didn't choose, right? It's like the person above you in the totem pole that's telling you what to do. You want to get it into like a reputable like paper, and you want like citations, etc. Or you might be working in whatever in big pharma, and there's similar issues there. So we invested in Molecule, which has the goal of connecting leading researchers with funding. They do this by turning the intellectual property and its development into kind of a liquid and easily investable asset. So in this case, IP NFTs. Um, they're essentially creating collaborative ecosystems, right? So where all of the stakeholders in the development of a drug, from the researcher to the people that might actually end up using it, can work together to bring new drugs to market. Um, it is a fascinating space that is growing incredibly quickly, and I think warrants a ton of attention for folks that are interested. So definitely check out Molecule. And then you mentioned cities. So Cabin, uh, formerly known as Cabin DAO, I think they've dropped the DAO name, which is an interesting trend we're seeing a lot. Cabin is they're building a network city. So it's a collection of properties around the world tied with a shared culture, community, economy, governance. The properties are what they call neighborhoods, and each one is independently owned and operated. And then the residents there kind of co-live, share amenities, and also have ownership in the place where they live, especially people that were early, um, who actually helped to build the thing and kind of imbue it with their vibe. I love it because they've gamified this whole thing. So there are different roles. Like you might have, classes in like a role playing game. So they have like caretaker, builder, host, naturalist, and so I might be like a resident, right? That's my role in the ecosystem, and the things that I do give me, cabin token, or maybe I'm the one paying into the ecosystem. And so each role kind of plays an important aspect in this world. And so, like, why a DAO, right? In this example, and I think it's because one, it's the scaling thing that we touched on with refraction, where once you blueprint something and you kind of strike on an idea that works, you can very quickly kind of almost like franchise it around the world, which I think is really cool. But then I think that Cabin actually lends itself really well to some of these ideas around community, because you want the early community that's building all of these things to have shared ownership and governance in the things that they're building, because that's how you build actual long lasting thoughtful community, right? If you think about the alternative, like if you and I tried to start a startup to compete and do this top down, and we'd raise $100 million and we'd hire a bunch of people and we'd get the trucks and, you know, like do the thing, but there's no connection to the thing. None of the people working on it would care at all about it except for the paycheck and then going home, right? So there's this kind of, I love this decentralized uh community aspect of like they're there on the weekends, like building, you know, and
Hmm.
it's really cool to see. They really have skin in the game. So
Hmm.
yeah, those are some of the more like high level, I'd say like net new
Hmm.
DAO ideas that are super out there, but I think are super exciting.
Yeah, in fact, in a counterintuitive way, the more out there it is, it might be a stronger community, right? Because I think that's what the internet kind of unleashed with things like Facebook groups initially, where like, let's say you have a very rare disease, but you can kind of find each other, and then now you can like share information, and now you can do that with all sorts of memes, and then have crowdfunding it, like share ownership, share governance, and making it happen, right? So, in a way, like a small and intense group that rally around the memes. For example, longevity. We believe it's so underfunded, and we really want
Mhm.
to live forever. Or with like psychedelics, where like, oh, it's illegal, but we all like truly believe in it. We think it's life changing, and we're all gonna like put our money and resources and time around it and funding the research there. Or things like a contrarian view of living, right? Like living in nature, and like purely remote and almost like a collective way, and like an gamified RPG way of living in the countryside in a cabin. Right, these are like fairly niche and contrarian views, and you can think of them as like underappreciated, underfunded things that like now you can kind of take a bet, a VC bet in a vibe, in a culture, in an idea by participating in these memes.
That's exactly it. I really like that framing. Because if you think about, the internet gave everyone the ability to find the people that were into the weird niche things that they are. Web3 DAOs, internet native organizations, give people the opportunity to now collaborate with those people and actually build something of value, and to invest early on in a scene. You know, like I used to be super into punk rock, and if I was, you know, if that was all happening now, if it was now like early 70s, and you could be part of the initial wave that memed that genre and idea
Mm,
space and philosophy into existence, and you could actually have a way to potentially benefit from that in some capacity, or at least show that you were there, you know, um, that's really cool. Yeah, so I really like that framing.
absolutely. All right. As with all good things, we still have to come to an end. We're like pretty over time. This is one of the longest episodes we've had.
Oh,
And
amazing.
yes, so let's try to wrap up in a few minutes, or in a couple of minutes now.
Mhm.
We've touched on so many things related to DAOs, and perhaps we can close with kind of a unifying vibe or idea that's underlying all of this again. Well, I threw mine out, which is I always love to talk about the spirit of the self-sovereign, which is like I think in this
Mm.
age where people tend to feel like helpless, like, oh, the macro conditions, these like authoritarian governments and oppressive platforms have all the power. But no, Web3 gives us an alternative where we can craft the we have the freedom to craft the mechanisms, the groups and formed organizations, the memes, the be it physical, digital, and so on, and therefore create the future that we want, right? So we can take up that responsibility and ownership to craft the freedom and take the freedom that we need to have. And I know C Club has a great ending to the thesis around interconnectedness and seeds. So we'd love to close with that message from you.
That's actually great. Yeah, thanks for picking up on that. This was my I wrote this essay, and then this was the part of the essay that I said is not open for feedback. Everything else underwent a lot of edits. This was like, I really want to drive this point home, and it's essentially that we see ourselves as part of this kind of ever growing and flourishing Web3 ecosystem, right? We're part of this grander unfolding narrative of the world decentralizing. And we kind of imagine, there's some seed metaphors here, where like seeds in fertile soil growing an intertwined root network that will provide the structure for a beautiful, diverse forest. That's a direct quote from this essay. And that's really how I see it, right? We are, I don't know, this root network, or the initial seedlings that are experimenting and seeing what happens. And I think it's an apt metaphor as well, because a lot of these experiments in the next few years will probably not make it. They will either adapt, or they will die in some capacity or form, but they will they will enrich the soil for the next generation of ideas, right? So whether it's DAOs or internet native organizations or some other meme that's yet to come, I think that um, that's what I'm excited about. I'm just excited to play a small role in this space as it unfolds.
Awesome. What a lovely metaphor to end on. It's been such an incredible conversation, Timour. Any final shout outs or call to actions? Maybe where can we find more about Seed Club or yourself before we go?
Yeah, so I am on Twitter. It is Timour XYZ is my handle. We are Seed Club VC on Twitter, I believe, and seedclub.ventures is our website.
All right. Then with that, we come to the end of this episode. This has been Timour Kosters from Seed Club Ventures and myself, Shikai from LongHash Ventures, and welcome to the Web3 Native podcast. Thank you all very much, and see you again next time.